Warning. This podcast features the truth about owning and operating mobile home parks. The following program is not designed to be sexy. It will not hype you up on MHPs. Rather, this is a raw take on this industry and how you find your own path to success. Welcome to MHP IRL, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, with your host, Ryan Norris.
Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to have a friend of mine, Paul Stout, join us today. Paul has roughly 500 mobile home units under active management across 3 states, 11 parks, and he's put 2 under contract. And didn't tell me about those 2 he just put under contract, Paul. Come on, man. I'm super proud of you, dude. So today we're going to talk about third-party management companies. This has been an episode I've wanted to do for the longest time. I've alluded to it on my podcast about the potential dangers of hiring third-party management companies. And Paul is a victim of exactly that, and in large enough scale too. So I'm really excited to have someone of Paul's caliber, first and foremost, to join us. And then secondly, this is just an absolutely perfect topic that I've been wanting to get to for a while. Before we even get into that, Paul, tell us about your background and tell us about your operation.
So right now, my background is in construction. I got into construction when I was pretty young. So I have about 25 years experience in the construction industry, mostly industrial construction. Anyone who knows anything about industrial construction would know that we work a lot of hours. So coming up through my career, I worked many 3,000 plus hour years, many 100-hour weeks, 12, 16, 18, 40-hour shifts. And so I started out looking for some way to get out of that life, to be able to spend time with my family. When I started looking at how to do that, it became apparent that real estate was an avenue that would probably work. And so I started looking into real estate. Of course, at the time I was working a job where we were working 12-hour shifts, 6 to 7 days a week. And so I thought about the prospect of, single family homes, apartment buildings, and I was kind of trying to think about how I could keep all of this together, and so as I learned more about investing in general, I actually came across mobile home parks, and it seemed to me like that was the answer I was looking for. It was scalable at the time. It wasn't like it is today, where you could actually go out and find some pretty decent deals. You can get some pretty decent returns. Apartment buildings, the returns were pretty low at the time. You'd have to get some C-class stuff, if not C-, in order to really get the cash flow returns I was looking for to be able to drop that W-2 job. And so I ended up purchasing my first mobile home park in early 2016, and it went very, very, very well. I purchased my second very shortly after. I was managing them myself at the time. I think I was working 70, 80 hours a week. And so I thought about expanding and realized that if I were going to expand any more than the, roughly 100 pads, 2 parks I had, it was going to take some assistance or some change to be able to get me to be able to operate these properties. So what I ended up doing was I tried to find some property management solutions, because I was a broker as well. I was working as a broker just in getting into real estate. I thought that becoming a broker was a good idea. And I ended up working pretty much exclusively with people that were buying multifamily and some single family, but for investment purposes. I noticed that, they would often ask me to help them find property management, which I was most often able to do through very high recommendations, and with long-term relationships with these folks. I found it was going very well. So I tried to find the same thing in the mobile home park space as far as management, to see if that existed. I asked around. There were plenty of small shops that, people had mixed reviews about. And then I came across a company that was very highly regarded. And I started asking around, and some people that were very well respected in the space, I knew they highly recommended them. They had used them. And so I decided that in order for me to grow, I was going to push fast forward on acquisitions and not hold myself back on operations by hiring this property management company. So I got a third property under contract, hired this property management company, and initially things went fairly well. I then purchased an additional 8 properties, gave them all to this company, and then things started to go a little bit south, which we're going to talk about. So that's pretty much my background, how I got into it. And so most of my growth was utilizing third-party property management. And then, of course, I've since had to start my own property management company, and I have taken all my properties back. So I self-manage everything at this point.
There's a few things there I want to highlight. First off, you have a construction background. So things like getting permits, hiring handymen and handywomen, any of those issues you're very familiar with. Also, yes. I want to highlight that you did it yourself for the first 2. So you actually got the gist of how to manage these, because mobile home parks aren't, while they require skill, it's not an overly complicated business. You just have to have seen enough iterations to really start to get good at it, which you had, because you had 2, roughly 100 right. pads. That's not some little 20-lot mobile home park. You had a good amount of scale. And also you did brokerage. And in brokerage, you found third-party companies for other people. So this isn't like, oh, I just had one mobile home park and had a bad experience. This is, you had oodles of experience. And not only that, you also vetted out properly a really big name third-party management company. Long story short, Paul, you didn't just make a quick mistake. You were legit and still got burned. Could we do a second and dive down a little bit deeper into this apartment complex strategy, which in my opinion actually works pretty reasonably well? I've got several friends in the apartment space, and third-party management companies can actually really help you scale. Can we spend a minute talking about how you kind of came to that conclusion, how you strategized around that, and then kind of transition, Paul, into when you started noticing things weren't going exactly according, like what red flags started to come up that kind of tipped you off that something might not be going right?
Sure. So regarding the apartment industry, you're correct. I would say that finding a good third-party property management company in the multifamily space, first of all, where I broker is in the Chicago metro. Third-party property management companies are literally a dime a dozen. And I would have to say that the majority of them are good. The majority of them can be trusted to take on 20, 30, 50, 100 units. They do a good job. They do what they say they're going to do. The folks that I know that utilize third-party property management, because I have numerous friends in this area and who live outside of this area who own anywhere from 50 to 500-600 units, and they all use third-party property management. They've all been using the same companies for years, and they're all satisfied with their third-party property management. I've worked hand in hand with third-party property management companies because oftentimes some of these third-party property management companies actually double as brokerages, and they have come to me because they know that I'm able to bring them investors. And so I've worked very closely with them. I've seen their operations, and they do a great job. In the mobile home park space, it's not as easy to find them. You can, and you're correct. I did vet them out, and some of the people that I contacted to vet out this particular company, you would recognize their names. And I have learned that they have since pulled some properties. Some of these people have pulled properties from this company as well. But when you look at the economics of it, as I started to see some of these issues, and I started to think about just this overall property management of mobile home parks, I looked at it from this perspective. I look at a high quality property management company in the Chicagoland area. The rents in this area, they probably average north of $1,500. So some property management companies, depending on the size of your portfolio, they will manage your property for anywhere between 5 and 10%. So that's 5 to 10% of $1,500. Now think about the mobile home parks, and even in this area, I've got 4 parks in this area, and our average rents are around $400 to $500 a month, because we're on the Indiana side, which is a little bit less than the Illinois side. As you get closer to the city, I think they pretty much cap out around $800. So you have $500 to $800 versus $1,500, and you're making 5 to 10% of that. So if you think about it, a really high quality property management company, if you're looking at those economics, you can see why they'd be drawn to the multifamily space. You can see why there is a drive for entrepreneurs who are getting into property management to go toward that. Plus, look at the education in that space versus ours. As you know, the education in our space, there are a few folks doing it, right? You know, you've got yourselves, you and Ian, you've got Frank and Dave. There really isn't a whole heck of a lot of information and education out there. Whereas the apartment space, all you have to do is Google, how to become a real estate investor, and you will literally get thousands of education programs for multifamily. And so the economics, to me, I think that could be a driver. So I believe that as the rents in the country begin to correct themselves to where they should be, which is probably about double where they are, I believe that you will start seeing better quality property managers, because they will realize that, if you're managing an apartment complex at $1,500 versus a stabilized mobile home park at $700 or $800, that may be worth it, because it would be less work at that point. So someday I believe that the economics will work in places like California, where rents are extremely high, or even portions of Florida. It may work, but it seemed like a great idea. It seemed to work for a while. There was plenty of testimonials that I collected, but it just started to fall apart at some point. And I have even heard of investors who have massive portfolios that this company and others are managing, and they're very happy with them. And so what I believe is that unless you have a portfolio in the multiple thousands, and you've got some high quality properties where the rents are high, I believe that is probably the issue that I ran into. Is even though my portfolio may sound large to some folks, especially beginners, from their perspective, it didn't get the attention that someone who has 4,000 pads is going to get.
So that's interesting that you say all that, and I can feel a handful of folks who are going to watch this cringing, waiting to ask a simple question. But Paul, it's mobile home parks. It's less work. You don't have to fix anything. It's a coupon clipper. They own their own home. Yeah, I get it. It's $400 or $500 versus $1,500, and there's no lease up in theory, right? So there's no bonus to move someone in. So the economics are less, but in theory, it's less work, right? Why does that break down in your experience?
So I would say overall, it could be, let's put it that way, it could be less work. But the reality of the situation is, even though you don't have the maintenance, you do not have the maintenance of an apartment complex, you do not have the let's say 50% of your tenant base rotating each year, so you don't have these massive turn numbers every year. There are other things, excuse me, there are other things that do make it more complex. And I would say one of those is the tenant base. I have found that our tenant base tends to be more needy. And a good example of that, if anyone has switched from the old check in the mail or check in a Dropbox to utilizing something like online payments or cash pay at a vendor, you will see that my guess would be that in an apartment complex, a transition like that would be much easier than in a mobile home park, because the folks, I mean, if you're going to do that switch, you better be ready to be answering some phones, some emails, because they find it very difficult. Without being too offensive here, there's probably a reason that they live in a mobile home park instead of a $1,500 a month apartment. And one of those reasons may be because they're not tech savvy in the least. They probably have a job that requires very little skill, so they have not picked up skills through college or some other job that they've been on where they're utilizing technology a lot. And also, we have a lot of older folks who are on fixed incomes with Social Security, and they just simply don't use technology. So, it's not to say that we don't have college graduates in our parks, because we absolutely do. I mean, I've definitely come across a few folks that, master's degrees in engineering, retired, just living in a mobile home park because that's what they like, because there's a big, community, and they didn't have that in a neighborhood. And, they do exist. However, I would say overall, our tenant base is probably a bit needier. I would guess that in an apartment, some of the complaints that they receive are, regarding the facilities not working. We get those calls too. And it's not to say that we have to address them, but we still get those calls. I mean, I'm sure that you can attest to this. Someone owns their own home, something breaks, they may still call you. You may not have to address it, but they'll probably still call you, and it'll probably take 4 or 5 calls to convince them that it's not your problem. So
then you still pay to fix it anyway. I did that literally this morning.
And sometimes you still pay to fix it anyway. So overall, I would say it is less moving parts, because I've got 2 regional managers. I call them regional managers, not really what they do for us, but let's just say it that way, because then people kind of understand what they do. They operate multiple properties. So those managers come from the property management space, multifamily. And so I'm getting to learn some of the differences, and they do appreciate some of the differences. They do say that overall it's much simpler. Doesn't mean it's easier. It is definitely simpler. Doesn't mean it's easier, especially when you're doing a turnover, a transition. See, we took on 375 units all at once, because I was operating 125 myself, and over the course of about a month, 2 months, we took back 375 units. It was chaotic. It was absolutely chaotic. So there was nothing easy about that. So I believe that if a property management company has the right systems in place, I believe that they could do very well. The thing that I found was that much of the stuff that really requires the time, it was being sourced out anyway. For instance, accounts payable can be a time consuming thing if you're not able to set it up with automatic payments and such like you do. And so that was one of the main reasons why I actually hired this third-party company, was to intercept the calls so I didn't have to take them, and also to do the books so I didn't have to do it. Well, I found out that they were actually utilizing companies to do a lot of that work for them, which is in my mind, it was like, okay, well, why don't I just hire those companies myself? because I can hire someone to take the calls, I can hire someone to do the books, and I'm pretty much in the same spot, which is what I ended up doing.
It's funny, there's a bunch to unravel there, but I'll start off by reiterating, like I've said on my podcast before, we are dealing with arguably one step above Section 8. And I have Section 8 residents. So it's in some cases not even a step above Section 8. And it's not that, like you, I have plenty of folks with master's degrees, college degrees, folks that you would never know would just prefer to live in a mobile home park. The community is, you cannot find these communities anywhere else. It's incredible, the kind of communities that just kind of build on their own within our mobile home parks. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't require, you're taking on a riskier clientele. You just are. So because of that, it requires a higher level of skill, and you don't own their homes. They do, which causes a lot more problems than folks think. And this morning, I literally had to deal with a guy who swears up and down that it's our lines that are getting backed up, and it's not him. And he's very, very elderly. So we're trying our best to help the guy out because he always pays. He's a wonderful person. Swears up and down it's our fault. Long story short, after 3 plumbers, we finally discovered his sewer pipe is just not even plugged in. It's not even plugged in. The sewer connection is there. There's nothing wrong with it. His main sewer line is just not plugged in. And so, in other words, you've got a guy on fixed income who can't afford to literally hire a plumber to just plug the dang thing in for him. And we have sewage running in our streets.
Wow.
Like, I'm sorry, man, I'm going to pay to fix this, and you can pay me free. Like, it's going to happen. And so that's just something that I think a lot of these talented third-party management companies it's just another skill set that you have to develop through iterations. It's not something you can just go to a college class and learn. You have to get on the bike and start riding. So, and then I'm having to deal with this yesterday and this morning is someone moves out and sells their tenant-owned home to someone who doesn't do the background check.
Yeah.
And we caught them because they had illegal dogs, so they didn't even know the rules. And we had to kick out a family. And then you'd think that person would have learned their lesson, turns around and sells it to another person. Same story. This time, I never would have approved this family for credit reasons on the front end. So it's like there's a high risk that this family is going to get evicted, and it's a tenant-owned home. Thankfully, the person reached out to corporate. I got involved. And I found out that this person would be totally open to basically having these folks have like a soft agreement with us for 3 months that if there's any issues, they're out. And I just buy the home from that original person who broke the rules, who's being totally reasonable, by the way. But so in other words, either these folks are going to work out and be fine. They just hit a rough patch and yada, yada, yada. Everyone will be happy and whatnot. Or it'll be horrible. We'll get them out, but I'll buy the home and everything will be happy. Well, guess what? The only reason why I know this is because I don't have a third-party management company who's going to make all the mistakes that you and I are about to talk about, right?
Yeah.
In other words, someone who you and I, we both now run our own operations, and we're going to catch stuff like this that requires us to get involved here to avoid a nightmare of a situation. So Paul, before we go on your list, because I'm so excited for you to just start reading off bullet points like you were doing before I hit record. Tell me, like, okay, so the red flags that you saw were like, hey, you're supposed to be managing my company for me, but you're outsourcing. I'm outsourcing that is getting things that are getting outsourced, like accounts payable. Like, what other red flags did you start seeing where you're like, something's not right here?
Yeah, one of the red flags that I started to see was the occupancy dropping. Collections were dropping. And, of course, every time I spoke to them, it was, COVID. But I don't know. It just, from what I was hearing from other operators in COVID and the effects it was having on them versus what I was actually, seeing happen with this company, it seemed like there was something wrong. I was also, I was catching little things like a bill from another property that we were paying. And, the only reason I caught it was because we had paid a bill, a few $100s, and I saw it. I was just going through some of our expenses, and I noticed that there was a bill for a company, and it sounded vaguely familiar. And I thought it was like a company that did water treatment for wells and inspections for wells. And I'm like, I have all city water in my portfolio. So I looked in, and certainly sure enough, that's what this company did. So I contacted them. Oh yeah, no, that was a different park. Sorry, that. And so I searched, and I found a few of these things where they're paying other parks bills on our dime. And then another time was, we had these managers, and I went down to the park. I was measuring because there were some things that I asked them to do. They weren't doing it. So I just went down and started doing it. For one of them was renovating homes. So I went down to one of our parks, and I had a list of, I think, 8 homes that I was going to walk through. Ryan, the first 2 homes I walked through were move-in ready. And I looked back, and they had been vacant for 3 months. And here the whole time I'm thinking that they're, being told that they're readying them for, they're trying to find contractors. It's too difficult during COVID, blah, blah, blah. And I walk in, the first 3 homes are ready to go, literally ready to go.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. One of them was on a demo list.
Please don't tell me that.
One of them was on a demo list, and I'm like, wow, this is unbelievable. We ordered homes in September. I told the guys at the property management company, okay, we ordered these homes. Let's get 3 bids for, setting up these homes, prepping the lots and installing. It took a long time to get these bids. I never did get all the bids. I got a single bid, and the bid was just outrageous.
Yeah.
And they recommended just utilizing them because they said, well, we can't find anybody else. And I said, man, there is no way. I mean, the guy was charging almost $9,000 for an install. And I'm like, why would you have to pay $9,000 for an install? And so I decided to just go and try and find contractors myself. I very shortly thereafter found a guy, and he was willing to do the installs for, I believe it was somewhere around $4,000. And so I had actually found someone that had used him to install over 100 homes. And I spoke to them. They said he did a great job. And so we ended up hiring him. And so far he's doing a great job. So, you start to see where the stories don't add up. We started to see, I was down at another property measuring lots because they were supposed to give me lot sizes so I could order homes. Never got it. So we went down, and a guy comes out, and I'm like, how you doing? He's talking to me, and he says, something to the effect that he was, he's a helper at the park, and that, he works with so-and-so, the manager. And I'm thinking, that's not the manager's name. So I called them, and I said, who's our manager down here? They said, it's so-and-so. And I said, well, this other guy told me that another name, that she's the manager. Oh yeah, well, so-and-so is actually going to work some other parks for us. And so we hired this person. And, I mean, it just, stuff like that started happening. And I decided to take one property just from an economic standpoint. Working with you and Ian and your mentorship program, we decided that I had 3 properties that I really didn't need them based on where they were in the economics of it. So I said, okay, I'm just going to take these over. I didn't have anything that was just like silver bullet kind of terrible stuff at the moment. So I ended up taking that one property, in fact, because it was right next to 2 other properties I was already managing. And that's the reason why we decided, well, why not just manage all 3, get a community manager that handles all 3 of those, and then on-site attendance at each. And so when I took that property back, that's when I really found the problems, because going through the leases, speaking to the tenants, getting firsthand accounts from tenants, from the existing manager that was there that we worked with to do the turnover, and digging through the books. That's when I really started to uncover the horrific truth of what was really going on, and then decided to take all the property back at that point.
I remember, by the way, one of our first conversations before you did the mentorship program, you sounded so overwhelmed and stressed out. And I remember our last mentorship call, you just sounded like a totally different human being. So before we get into quite literally the worst of it, because I'm excited to hear the bullet points. Like everybody listening in, before I hit record, I cut Paul off in the middle of his list because I was like, I want people to actually be able to see my facial reactions and hear this stuff because it's so atrocious. But real quick before we do, I'll say this. My collections improved during COVID, and you and I talked at length about that. And I am a big fan of the value adds, the heavy value add deals. I don't just exclusively buy heavy value add deals, but I love a good, just heavy turnaround that no one will touch. And oftentimes, those are properties bought by an out-of-state owner that hired a third-party management company. And I have run into more than one major, big-time, great reputation third-party management company that have just absolutely run properties into the ground. So I've seen itsy-bitsy little mom and pop third property management companies run stuff into the ground to the point where Ian and I get excited because we're like, hey, value add deal. And I have seen big time, big name. Everybody has heard of them. You've heard of the people who use them, run it into the ground. So it's not just a little guy here and there. It can be the big ones. But Paul, I'm going to hit mute and I want you to just bloodbath it. I want to hear all of it, man. Let's do the bullet point, man. Tell me the worst of it.
So the first item that I found, I think, is enough to fire any property manager. They let 2 of our licenses lapse on 2 of our parks. So basically what it was the health department had sent some notices and said, we need this done. And it was super simple stuff. But basically they were not taking care of the things that the health department guy wanted them to take care of. So we sent him a notice that said, look, if you don't take care of these things, which normally, with health departments, it's like, take care of this, here's your new license. Because they kind of just trust you to do it. But apparently he had been on them and they've done nothing so much that he decided to pull our licenses. Fortunately, I'm working with the guy. We're getting our licenses back. Everything's fine. The other thing is, in 2 of the properties that they had, one of them, our occupancy went from 50 to 37. Another one, our occupancy went from 83 to 73. I found at one property that they had been paying over $2,000 a month, excuse me, in utilities for tenants that had been living there for months. That in itself, I mean, that's $2,000 a month just by telling those tenants they had to take their own utilities. That was over $2,000 a month that was coming back into the property. Many missing leases, many more that were incorrectly filled out. We had lease options and mobile home rent credit agreements that were filled out improperly. And some of these improperly filled out agreements can be very costly if they go bad. So there's a huge amount of liability in the future that we don't even know how it's going to play out because of the fact that these leases, lease options and MHRCA agreements were filled out wrong. So the cost of that is yet to be seen. Some of the folks that were paying on homes, they just stopped paying and they agreed that that was their last payment. And they could not answer why that person was given a home. They changed the terms on some of the lease options. Just the ones that I found I calculated a loss of over $50,000. They hired, this wasn't early on. This was one of the issues that we talked about kind of early on that made me start to think. So originally, when we talked about hiring a property manager for the site manager, we had a budget in place. Excuse me. It's not COVID, believe me. So we had a budget in place for this manager. I found out very shortly thereafter that they were paying this manager literally twice what we agreed. So I contacted them. I asked why. They basically said that it was because they hired a husband and wife team instead, and we had a lot of renovations at this property that needed to be done. And so they figured that it was going to cost a lot less to hire this team because of the fact that this man was a home renovator and he was going to take care of all the renovations. So I thought about it. I'm like, okay, well, I guess that pretty much, that makes sense. Okay. Just looking at the economics of it. As the months went by, I started seeing bills from contractors come in for renovating homes. So he was not renovating the homes, as he said. We were still paying contractors. Some of these contractors we were way overpaying because they were not getting the pricing. So I demanded that they got the budget in line with the manager. From the very beginning to when we actually got it right took months and months and months. They lost a $20,000 check from one of our chattel lenders. So someone had gotten a loan. The bank sent us a check. The check was lost. I was contacted by the local rental assistance organization, and they had stated that they had been sending checks for a particular tenant. They were never applied to that tenant's account. Those checks were lost. We ended up, let's see what else. Okay, so some of the contractors that they hired, they were not vetting them. They were not verifying that the work was done correctly. We had to get some of the work redone. We found and were contacted by vendors that had unpaid bills to the tune of $10,000 from 6 months prior. We also noticed that they were not enforcing the rules at the properties. Of course, the collections we talked about were very bad. There was a dog attack of a tenant, and the tenant that was attacked was actually the manager that they hired's daughter. They did nothing when this happened. They basically just, they did nothing. And so when I found out about it, of course, as that is probable liability still hanging out there. Not sure what's going to happen with that. So I actually had to direct them on what to do. At the point that I'd heard about it, they hadn't even made the tenant whose dog attacked get rid of the dog. And so that was obviously the first thing I had them do. We found that the accounting was just atrocious. I had to pay my CPA thousands of dollars to repair accounting mistakes. Some of those mistakes, like I said, were paying bills for other properties that we didn't even own, paying bills from incorrect accounts. We found that some of the titles that they transferred for us, they transferred them into the wrong name. This was one that I saw the effects of it pretty quickly. We had a property, I can't remember which one it was, but they listed my personal information when they registered the property. So as you can imagine what happened next. I mean, my phone blew up all over the place. And so that was a problem that I had to deal with and get under control. They were, let's see, they were not getting, the bids that we talked about. That was the one that, took them months and months to get a single bid. Let's see, I found as I was going through some of the offices, there were just piles of paper everywhere. In these piles of paper, I found titles. I found that $20,000 check, which hadn't been cashed and couldn't be cashed at that time. So I had to have it resent because, by the way, the check also had the wrong entity name on it. I found some titles that had been lost, but we still have many titles missing. There were titles that they were given to process. These were basically brand new homes. There were 16 of them. And we had the certificates of origin. So they were supposed to get the titles transferred. And, that was one of the first tasks that they were supposed to do. They still hadn't done that. And I had to find those titles. I finally found them stuffed in a drawer someplace in the office. We also found vacant homes that had the heat set at like 85 degrees in the wintertime. And so we were paying $300-400 bills on some of these vacant homes. I found a lot of sensitive data, copies of driver's licenses, personal information, social security cards, just sitting out in offices or sitting in piles on the floor. I had, I believe, almost 20 titles that were supposed to be transferred to tenants because they purchased homes that they did not transfer. One of those tenants sued us because of it, so we had to deal with that. The IDPH recommendations, of course, we talked about. They were asked to trim trees. They were given the money in the budget to trim trees. They did not do it, and a branch fell on a tenant's home, and we were sued for that because of the fact that the tenant notified us prior to, which of course, we knew about that this tree was dangerous. They were given the approval, and it was some 4 months after they were given the approval and the dollars to do it that the branch fell. So we got sued for that. And of course, our insurance company, I don't know if they're going to pay it or not because of the fact that we screwed it up, right? They allowed, large dogs in the park that we had to, we're still working on getting rid of. When the tree trimmer did come out, they took down some trees, and apparently one of the tenants asked if he could have some of the logs so he could split them and sell them as firewood, and they allowed it. I drove out to the property, and there were literally hundreds of giant logs in this guy's yard piled up, 4 feet tall, 20 feet wide piles of wood. And, I kind of lost my cool on that one, called them, made them have the tree trimmer back to collect all those logs and process them. I refused to pay for that, of course, which they did, but still, that was a huge mess. And of course, they didn't clean up the mess that it left to have hundreds of logs laying on the ground. They signed long-term agreements with companies that I specifically told them not to, because I was planning on switching services, which caused me basically legal battles back and forth to prove that they were not approved to sign those. They were not selling homes. They were not marketing homes. Like I was telling you, we walked through and we found at least between the properties, probably 8 homes that were absolutely 100% ready to go, that had been vacant for months. We found other properties that required cleanup, not even repair, just cleanup, that were then ready to go. We were told, of course, take this with a grain of salt, but when we took over, we were told that tenants had been trying to get a hold of them for weeks, no return calls. And so, we had to deal with a lot of unaddressed issues that they should have been addressing. They were supposed to switch when we purchased a property. Some of the tenants were paying on the 15th, and that's a huge pain in the butt to have some tenants paying in different dates. They were supposed to switch that. They never did. So we had to switch that. They were supposed to work with some of the tenants to convert to, help these tenants purchase their homes. They never even attempted to do that. In certain parks, we came in and we still had rentals. Because we told them immediately when we took over that property, we don't do rentals. If these people want to buy it, let's make it as easy as possible. If they can't, let's work something out where they keep paying rent for X amount of months, and then they own the homes. They never even attempted to go through that process. They paid incorrect amounts for utility bills. So when we went through our utility bills and we were taking over, we had utility accounts that had hundreds, in some cases thousands of dollars of credit. And then we had other utility bills that were overdue by months that were they were threatening to turn them off. And it was a bigger deal than what I would have expected to get the money back. So we were trying to deal with getting money back, which takes like 6 weeks to get your money back when you overpay an account, apparently. And then we had to pay all the bills that were left unpaid. We found that the property taxes had not been paid. And this was, I think, 3 or 4 months after they were due that we found this out. So both the personal and the real estate taxes had not been paid. So we had, late fees. And of course, that could have been very dangerous because our property could have gone to auction or, they left utilities on and vacated units that, there was no need to leave utilities on. We had parks that were supposed to be sub-metered. They never did that. We found, let's see, one of these here was that it was $4,000 that was paid into one of those utility accounts. It wasn't even our account. It was for a neighboring home. It wasn't even our address. We didn't even own that property. Lots of late fees we found in billing, and we just did not, we had to pay all those late fees. There was nothing really we could have done. There was another situation where we had a property and we were thinking about changing the layout. So we told them to, on our initial rent raise, let's get them to market and let's come up with a good ratio utility billing that covers our sewer and water. So they did it. And this one's probably, not probably, this one is my fault because I should have caught this one sooner. But we have a flat rate sewer bill of about $33 per tenant. And then each tenant averages about $67 a month in water. So the ratio billing for tenants should have been around $90 to $100. It was $24. I don't know where they came up with that number, but that's what it was. So we had to fix that. And we found a lot of paperwork that was just done incorrectly. Wrong entity names. When it came to utilities, it was very difficult to get switched over because they were asking for EINs. They had wrong EINs listed to different properties. They had wrong entities listed on utility bills. There was one that cost us a lot of money. They did sell some homes at one property in Indiana. They did not report those sales to the Department of Revenue. And so we got hit with not only a big unexpected bill for those unpaid taxes, but fines for that. The rent rolls were a disaster. We had occupied units that showed vacant. We had vacant units that showed occupied. And kind of go along with your story about folks just selling their homes. We had that in a couple situations. And when we ran these folks, we would have never let them in. We had one where a tenant passed away. And so they just marked the home as vacant when the tenant passed away. And we had no idea that this happened. By the time we took over the property, this was 4 months in. We were getting a lot of problems with people breaking into vacant homes or when people were on vacation. And so we sent out an email that basically said, if you have information about this, we'll give you $500 if we find the person and arrest them. We immediately got probably 20 emails that everybody thought it was this person in this unit that was supposed to be vacant. So what we found out was when this person passed away, her loser son moved into her home and basically just lived there. It took us 6 weeks to get them out because by that time they had already been paying utility bills and we couldn't just have them arrested for trespassing at that point. So that was a huge nightmare. And all this time they broke into vacant homes, rent-ready homes that we ended up having to do $3,000-$4,000 in repairs because they stole carpets and fixtures and busted drywall and doors and windows. So it was a nightmare. And that's the end of my list.
Well, anybody who's listening to this and not watching it on YouTube, I hurt hearing these things. They made me cringe very hard. Paul, I don't even know where to begin, dude. I don't even know where to begin. I really hope that that bloodbath that you went through really discourages people from trying to copy paste from the apartment realm, because as anyone watching or listening in, I've tried to say this in so many words and so many different podcasts and interviews and everything. Paul, you are a living example of why it just doesn't work that way. So before we transition into how'd you fix it, because I think that this does have a pretty happy ending, there are a few kind of cheeky questions I want to ask, kind of questions that I know folks are thinking that are going to be that guy or that girl who are going to ask them. So Paul, I want to play to that crowd. Didn't you tell them? Didn't you just say, hey, listen, these are the kind of things that are going on. Can't we work through this? Or maybe, Paul, did you ask too much of this company? What about maybe if you had just applied the same situation to more stable properties and to more turnarounds? What would you say to the kind of internet troll crowd who are thinking those things, who are going, oh, well, if I just buy stable properties, if I don't have turnarounds in the mix? I think I know your answer too, by the way, which is that, Paul, some of your properties were stable and you still had a ton of issues. Paul, what would you say to that kind of internet troll crowd who's thinking to ask something like that?
First thing I would say is that in some respects, they're probably right, because I could have caught some of these things earlier if I was watching more closely, or I guess if I knew what to look for. If I knew, so basically, let's put it this way. If we get to a point in our industry where third-party management becomes more viable, I'll have a lot more experience in knowing what to look for and how to find it. Okay, because I did find all this stuff, but a lot of it I didn't find until I was actually digging through paperwork. So there were a lot of things that I should have and could have caught prior to it becoming an issue. You know, so that is a fact. But one of the reasons why I hired a third-party property management company was because I simply did not have enough time in the day to do as much watching as I am doing now, because of the fact that I no longer have my W-2 job. I'm doing this full time. So I have a lot more time to watch these things and to find these things. Should I have set up systems where they reported on KPIs that would have indicated some of these issues? Yes, I should have. So if people are going to go this route anyway, they certainly need to figure out what sorts of things can go wrong and what sorts of data points will identify these things that are going wrong, so that they can actually find them. Some of the things I don't know that I would have found regardless of what, I was, looking for. Like, for instance, the state pulling our licenses. I'm not sure how I could have found that, unless I just called the state every quarter for an update on how we doing, or if I had them send all the information to me. That would be one way of doing it. Maybe not even letting them deal with licensing and you getting all those notifications. That's probably one way to fix that situation. As far as some of the other things, though, one of the properties was very much stabilized, very nice property. And one of the things that pretty much started me down the path of thinking this is not going well is that this property should have been cash flowing like crazy, and it wasn't. And that was the same property that one of the first things I found was the $2,400 in utilities that were being paid, that shouldn't have been paid. We also found people that, for whatever reason, they were not being required to, they didn't sign them up. We used a third party to do our meter readings, and they never signed those people up. So basically, I think there were 4 tenants. We were paying their water bill every month, and that wasn't included in that $2,400. That $2,400 was like electric bills. So things like that, boy, I don't know. The only thing you could look at is why are these bills so high? And of course, I did ask those questions, but the answers were always reasonable. Well, we have to have the electric on, and we're working on these houses, and so on and so forth. So in some respects, I should have found more of this before this all came to a head. In others, it would have been very difficult to find regardless of what I did. And you're putting a lot of trust into these people. And when you put all this trust in these people, you have to understand that there are certain things that they can do to harm you that you just will not know until it's too late. The thing with the trees, I would have had to driven through beforehand to know that they didn't do the work they were supposed to do. The dog bite, I don't know how you would have. I can't imagine they wouldn't have, procedures in place as a company on how to handle that situation. So if nobody told me about it, there was no way I could have known. But if you look at the overall situation, I think that it just speaks to the fact that even if you are in a position, if you have 3,000-4,000 lots and it's all stabilized and you can hire third-party property management and your rents are high, you still need to watch. Just like anything else, you've got to come up with KPIs that are going to tell you, and that's probably the hardest part, because in order for you to come up with these KPIs to tell you that these issues are happening, you kind of need to know what sorts of things can go wrong and what sorts of data points will indicate that, in order for you to even, because everybody says, oh, watch your KPIs. That's real easy to say, but which KPIs, which data points would show that this stuff was happening? And how do you get those reported? So I think it's going to be possible someday, but as it stands right now, if your portfolio is probably 1,500, 2,000 or less, you're probably going to want to figure on managing yourself, because that's really the only way at this point. I'm sure that there's some small mom and pop third-party property management someplace that does a phenomenal job, but it's going to be hard to find them, and you really have to take these lessons and what happened to other people, because this information I'm telling you, obviously not bringing up any names, had another person that I know very well. They had a much larger portfolio than me. Same exact scenario. They pulled back all their properties as well. This person too. We've talked about it, and so I'm not alone in this.
Well, I don't even know where to begin, Paul. Look, what gets measured gets managed, just like you said. And are there things you could have done differently? Absolutely. But what I've learned being a psychology nut is I like studying people like Bernie Madoff. And what you learn by studying con artists doesn't necessarily help you spot a con artist or that you got swindled by a con artist. It's just like Robert Greene says in 48 Laws of Power. You don't have to read this book because you want to go and be a monarch of a country. You can read this book to understand how people use power to manipulate you. So in other words, I like to study con artists because I know that con artists also employ the same tactics. And one thing con artists do incredibly well is they always have good answers to things that are kind of gray area. And that's exactly what you're describing. Again, not that they were con artists. It's just that they had at least long enough, good enough answers, Paul, to kind of have you start sniffing around and then stop sniffing around. And it wasn't until it got a little too out of control that it just, there was no sweet talking anymore that could justify what was going on, to the point where you got in and kicked it out. And to your point, listen, you lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, most likely. That hurts. So have I. I've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's just, I've gotten sued before. If you own a business in the United States of America, you're going to get sued. You're going to make mistakes. And you're going to learn from them as long as you can survive. And that's kind of where I want to end off today, Paul, which is that you went through an experience, to say the least, and you have a pretty happy ending. So I kind of want to merge the last two sections into one. So the last two questions I really have for you, Paul, are, first and foremost, how'd you fix it? And then you've kind of really answered this. throughout the whole episode, but what advice do you have for others? Maybe there's a few takeaways that you hadn't mentioned before, but before we get into all that, you've described a complete nightmare. Paul, how'd you fix it?
The way we fixed it is basically we just took all the management back in house. Everything that I currently, let's say, subcontract as far as business operations, bookkeeping, for instance, is two-tiered. I have one person doing the day-to-day bookkeeping, but then I also have a second person that's watching that first person, so that all the reconciliations and all the bookkeeping are not done by the same person. So there's checks and balances in anything that I do at this point. I'm also building out, because this is relatively fresh, so we're starting to build out processes and systems so that we're not operating the parks this way as well, because we have a lot to fix. I mean, a lot to fix. As you saw from the list, all this stuff has to be fixed. A lot of it takes time. It's not going to change overnight. So at this point, with the people that I have working for me now, we're working on fixing it. We're working on processes and systems to keep it fixed once we fix it, to keep it from happening again. And then also, we're just basically learning every day on mistakes. I've had managers make mistakes, and they apologize up and down. And I say, I want you to every once in a while make mistakes, because that means you're doing something. You're making decisions. You're taking control of the situation. If you never make any mistakes, it's probably because every decision you're calling me and asking me for an answer. So you still have to trust people, but you have more control over these people when they work directly for you versus through a third party, because of the fact that there were things that I knew were wrong initially, and I stated my concerns to the third party property management company, and it took a long time to fix because I had to keep following up. Why isn't this fixed? Why isn't this fixed? Now I can fix it much quicker. So we move a lot quicker now. So that has fixed a lot of things. We're mending fences with our tenants who were basically soured through the whole experience going through that. And so that's going to take time. We have improved a lot of our relationships with our tenants, but some of them we're still working on improving them. And we just go on. We get back to the fundamentals. We run the business like a business, how it's supposed to be run. And when issues come up, we address them and we learn from whatever those situations were, so that we're better the next time. And as far as advice, the biggest piece of advice that I can give someone that I did not do, if I were to start over, is if you're going to start out, you're probably going to start out small like me, right? I bought one park. I ran it myself. I mean, literally myself. I didn't even have a manager because I wanted to know everything. Okay, so if you're going to do that, the thing that I did not do that I should have, that I would highly recommend, is every single time you have to do something at that property, write it down, explore it, think about it, and record how you fixed it, how it went, and from that, build processes and systems well before you ever need them. That way, when you do need them, you're plugging them in and you're playing. I'm building processes and systems now while I'm trying to address this and manage 500 properties. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of pain, and I could have been doing that all along, and I would have been light years ahead of where I am now. I would also recommend that anyone who's looking to get into this business plan on operating yourself or partnering with someone who can. Okay. Do not plan on turning your stuff over, especially early on. I've heard of people that are coming into the space from the multifamily space, and I've heard their pitches on their money raises, and their whole business is being built on giving third-party property management their companies the exact same way as apartments. And I just cringe because I don't think it's going to end well. I really don't think it's going to end well. In fact, one that I heard recently was the same company that, we had gotten rid of. And so just be careful with your funds if you're going to be investing in anything like that. go with someone who is a seasoned operator and manages in-house. It's the exact opposite of apartments, because you can get pretty good results both ways with the apartment building, multifamily space. In this space, don't go into this thinking it's a passive investment. It is not. Go into it understanding that you will need to pour out blood, sweat, and tears for a couple of years if you want to be successful and you want to build a business. But build a business from the beginning. Do not work in it, work on it, and build it from the beginning. Even if you don't think you're going to hire anyone ever, it doesn't matter. Still build your processes and put them in place just in case, because at some point you may be big enough, and instead of turning it over to a property management company, use the same funds to hire a good qualified manager to operate these properties. That would be the advice I would have.
Well, that's outstanding. And in my show notes here, I literally wrote, this is a business. So it's great to hear that some of the best advice that you have for folks is, reminder, you're buying a business. This is a leveraged buyout of a cash flowing business. And you got to treat it as a business, meaning you got to have systems, processes. Even if you're outsourcing a ton of stuff, you need to check on, you need to trust but verify that you're getting what you're paying for. And I want to reiterate what you said a little bit earlier, which anybody listening in here that is a third-party manager, I really want you to hear, you're not all bad. That's not what the point of this episode is. This episode isn't to beat up their property management companies. The point of this episode is to explain to folks where and why you should use them and what risks that you take on when you do. Again, I think for tactical purposes, short-term purposes, third-party management can be outstanding. Like Paul said earlier, if you know what to look for, if you have developed out really good systems and processes from actually having gone through the iterations and seeing it yourself, you're much more equipped to handle it better. And again, they're not all bad. It's just that you can't just take this copy and paste strategy from the apartment world and just expect everything to go well and not treat it like a business, because that's what it is at the end of the day. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. I thoroughly enjoyed having you not only on this interview, but also as a mentee. It was really fascinating helping you through that process. And I've got to say, even with 4 months of helping you through that process, I guess we didn't even get to some of the really awful things that you discovered.
Yeah.
So it's just a wild and crazy story. And the thing is, Paul, you are not alone. You are not alone. I've tried to buy properties that were mismanaged by third-party management companies. You and I have mutual friends in the space that also got burned in very similar ways. Folks need to hear your story. So I am super glad that you came on and used my platform to help others not make the same mistake. So thank you, Paul, for putting yourself out there like you did today.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, Ryan. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Even though it brought up some bad memories.
Well, the good news is it has a really happy ending, and you've got 2 more under contract. So I look forward to chatting through those with you too at some point. But Paul, thanks again. Everybody, thanks again for listening in.
Thank you.
Entrepreneurs make mistakes, but with the overwhelming amount of free information out there, you don't have to be doomed to making those same mistakes. You just have to find a consolidated version of the most important information. What if I told you I'll gift you all of my DD mistakes I've made over the years for free? Just leave me a 5-star review, screenshot the review after it goes live, and email it to me at my website, archimedesgrp.com. Afterwards, join our Facebook group, Mobile Home Park Mastermind. You'll find hundreds of other mobile home park owners sharing ideas, contractors, and deals. It's free to join, and we would absolutely love having you join us.